All right. Welcome everyone to the very first Reach Higher Careers panel of the 2021-2022 school year. My name is Lizzie Gray and I'm a project coordinator for Connected Lane County, and I will be your host today. Today's panel features 5 engineers, all from different engineering disciplines, who currently work at local companies. And to get us started, we'll go around the Zoom room and have panelists introduce themselves. Panelists, please share your name, your title, and what company you work for. And we'll start first with Cody.
All right, thank you. I'm Cody Kenny. I'm a principal and the engineering manager at Evergreen Engineering. Our headquarters are in Eugene, and we also have offices in Atlanta, Georgia, and Everett, Washington.
Awesome. Welcome, Cody. Up next, we have Jeremy.
My name is Jeremy Pond. I am the applicator unit manager for PackTech here in Eugene. We have 3 locations currently, building a 4th, 1 in Cottage Grove and then 3 in the Eugene area. And I'm a chemical engineer by trade.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Up next, we have Jared.
Hello, my name is Jared Hensley. I am the Director of Engineering for Roseboro Glulam Products. We are a glulam manufacturer based here in Springfield, Oregon, and we have another plant facility out in Veneta.
Great. Welcome. Yona.
My name is Yona Appletree. I'm a senior software architect at Concentric Sky.
Welcome. And last but not least, Dalen.
I'm Dalen Wilhite, senior mechanical engineer at eWeb, mostly working on the generation facilities.
Awesome. Thank you, Dalen. Thank you all for being here. And it's interesting, as you introduce yourselves, it dawned on me that we have done student tours at every single one of your businesses. So that's awesome. Thank you for coming back to participate in a different form. So folks tuning in, feel free to type in any questions that you have. I will say that the questions you submitted in your registration are what we pulled from to come up with the list of questions that we plan to ask all of our panelists today. But if there is something that you really want asked that you do not hear in our list of questions, please feel free to type those into the chat or the Q&A feature. Alrighty, so I'm going to get us started with the very first question, and I think we'll probably go in the same order. So if you remember who you followed, if not, I can help prompt you. But Cody, you'll kick us off, and the question is, what was your pathway into this career? So your education, any post-secondary or any certifications you needed.
All right, yeah. So I took the route of, I went to community college after high school, and I went to Central Oregon Community College, and then I transferred to Oregon State and got my bachelor's in civil engineering there. I also, while I was there, participated in the MECOP program, which is a multiple discipline engineering cooperative program that provides internships to engineering students while you're in college. And after that, I was hired by one of the companies I worked for in the MECOP program, and worked there for, well, I had to work there for 4 years in order to get enough experience to take my professional engineering exam to become a licensed professional engineer. So that was my basic path to become an engineer.
Great. Thanks, Cody. Jeremy, up next.
Yeah, I started out, went to University of Portland my freshman year. I was, yeah,
Go Pilots.
I figured it quickly that you're a pilot, Lizzie. So
I sure am.
but I went there on a scholarship for math and decided that I didn't want to be a actuary guy. So I transferred to Oregon State and knew I wanted to be an engineer. And I enjoyed chemistry in high school and decided to go down the chemical engineering path. So I got my BS at Oregon State in chemical engineering. I didn't do the MECOP program, but I did do an internship program, which is where I ended up starting my career at. It was a company called Hercules in Portland as a process engineer.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeremy.
Uh-huh.
I see Jared looking for the button. There you go.
I'm here. So yeah, I think you're going to hear a lot of regurgitation in this because for engineers, there's a lot of similarities in our path, right? So we all went to, especially for PEs, you have to have your bachelor's of sciences of some kind. So mine was actually in architectural engineering with a structural emphasis. I had this grand design of being able to design buildings as well as make them stand, not the other way around, right? So I got my bachelor's at the University of Wyoming. So I'm another oddball in the circle. Moved here just recently 3 years ago from that area. So you get your bachelor's, you take your fundamentals of engineering exam, which is a 6-hour test. That test helps you decide which way you're going to go, because there's I think roughly 110 questions, but it's every capacity of engineering you can think of is represented. After that, you take your 8-hour exam, which is your professional engineering exam that's for your discipline. And then if you want to take it another step further, there's the structural engineering exam that's actually 16 hours, 2 days, 8 hours apiece. And you go on from there. So it's a lot of exams and a lot of reading and a lot of mathematics. So we also said at my college that, you know, the engineering school was the #1 recruiter for the business school. So
Awesome.
you take your math in some format. So
Yeah. I had no idea that a test like that existed where you could kind of test into any discipline of engineering. It's a smart.
well, so after you go through the fundamentals, kind of tests you on everything. And then once you decide to take your professional engineering exam, even though my degree is in structural, you can take your PE basically in whatever field that you want to, as long as you have your 4 years of engineering experience. But, you know, for me as a structural, if I wanted to take the transportation or the industrial or mechanical, I would have been, hosed really, right? Because they're counting on that 4 years of experience towards your exam so that you know what you're doing. It tests your skills.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. And Yona.
Well, certainly I'll be the odd one out here in software engineering, the newest of the fields represented. Also, I think I was somewhat picked for this panel in part because I have a different path. I was homeschooled and I started writing code and doing software work when I was really young, around the age of 12, right, sort of at the beginning of high school. And I was quite interested in that and spent what would have been my high school time. I went to a school here in Eugene called HomeSource, which was kind of a resource center for people taking non-traditional paths. And I ended up getting my first internship in the field without any formal training at 17. And then I worked at that company for a couple of years, for a few months for 6 months as an intern. And then I was promoted to sort of a level 1 software engineer. And after that, I moved on to another company, which is actually where I still work. It's now been 15 years. At Concentric Sky, and I started off sort of in a mid-level position and worked my way up to senior architect, which is, you know, somewhere in terms of the non-managerial side of software. That's at least, you know, if you're not working for Google, that's kind of the top that I can do. But yeah, it's just been a lot of writing code and, you know, a lot of learning on the job, and no 16-hour tests, although I think maybe there should be some more testing, but you know, it's more about what the software you make can do.
Great. Thank you for being here to kind of represent the non-traditional path. It's an incredibly valuable point of view.
Absolutely.
And Dalen.
Yeah, I grew up in Oregon, but I ended up going to school at Montana State, and actually started out I knew I kind of wanted to do engineering, but started out in general studies because I really didn't have a good path. But while I was getting some core classes out of the way and some 101 courses, figured out or committed to mechanical engineering, and then got my did the FE, the fundamentals engineering, and then professional engineering at eWeb.
Okay, very cool. Alrighty, on to the next question. So looking back at your early education, and then I think we're talking like middle to high school, what high school classes or extracurriculars helped you prepare for your career path? And I feel like I've heard a lot of talk about math, which is awesome. Something that we try to weave into everything that we do with young people, because it's one of those concepts that's hard to see when you're in high school or middle school about how it's going to help you after school. So happy to hear that. But Cody, what do you think? What else helped you prepare?
Well, obviously, you got the math, physics, and other sciences that are staples to all the engineering disciplines. I have a big proponent of kids going and doing the wood shops and the mechanics classes and the hands-on things where they learn about physical things, and computer classes and coding, all that kind of stuff, gives you a foundation that helps build on the engineering principles that you're going to learn later. And so I also was able to take some drafting classes in high school, and I actually started, with hand drafting. And that's a good skill set to learn, is how to present information on a drawing for an engineer. Another thing I thought was really valuable was I did sports, but I also worked part-time for my dad, who happened to be an excavation contractor. So I got to be out in the field, actually, being on construction sites and building things, that I thought has been valuable in my career.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jeremy, anything to add to that list?
Yeah, the one thing I'll add from the work and the extracurricular side of things is I started in sixth grade picking strawberries, and I knew in seventh grade I didn't ever want to do that again, right? So I was able to work my way up to be like a farm hand, but progressing and having some real life, like, what do I not want to do?
Yeah,
Not just what do I want to do, was a big one.
definitely.
And then, like Cody mentioned, I did sports, but I also did scouting, and scouting had a whole different group of folks that were there. But one of the things I wrote up was that there was a lot of cross pollination of the math and the sciences, and the home ec and the wood shop that came into scouting too. So just to get your hands dirty and being able to see a wide variety of things to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
not everybody's going to be an engineer, but a lot of people will want to be an engineer. So
Yeah, definitely. I also, we took a trip to Willamette High School last week, actually the day before Halloween, and we're able to visit with their ninth graders. And at Willamette, they're piloting something new called the CTE Cruise. And so every incoming ninth grader gets to get a couple weeks in each CTE program that Willamette has to offer them. And so, in the past, it's been very passive in how we recruit kids into CTE programs. And so we end up with a lot of students that look the same and that are interested in the same things. And so with this cruise course, they get to, every student gets to experience a little bit about each CTE course and gets to see what sticks out to them, which I would love to see in every high school. Alrighty, so we're gonna stick to this order, but I see your note, Cody. That's a great idea. We'll popcorn around in just a little bit. But Jared, what would you add?
Come on, you don't like the snake draft? No. No, so I would add, obviously the same things as these guys, but I also participated in like the student council aspect of it all, as well as debate. I don't know about these guys, but you get a lot of cross-discipline action when you're an engineer. So especially if we're designing buildings or something like I do, you still have to incorporate the mechanical, the plumbing, the electrical. So you're cross-debating a lot of times, especially with the architect, right? So trying to figure out what goes where and how you're going to make it work. And then also the leadership and teamwork, no matter how you get that, the leadership is a big part. And if you think about some of the buildings that we do construct, they're massive projects. And like with Cody being oversight on the drafting, you got a lot of people that you have to get organized in the right row. So having that leadership or the teamwork aspect of it all really helps out.
Yona.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna +1 on the teamwork there. In my notes, I said that I had an opportunity a couple times during my high school years. There was a game designer who our school brought in, and we had a class where we actually built video games, and I was the programmer for that. And I think that was probably one of the more formative experiences. So anything where you can, structure something that looks like what the actual job environment looks like. So get a team of people together to build something with a really strong emphasis on actually having like an end goal or like a final product that you create, having that, because and that happened to me a number of times, but that class in particular stands out. Having the experience of, trying to come up with what you're going to make and then struggling because there's lots of problems, and then ultimately prevailing probably with something less than you originally thought, but then feeling good about what you built nonetheless. I think that's just an amazing experience, and several of the people from those classes ended up in the career. Certainly when it comes to software, anything you can do to motivate yourself to actually write code, that's really, at the end of the day, open source projects. I programmed probably 8 hours a day for many of the years of my teenage. And that's I don't know exactly how to tell people to motivate to do that, but if you can, that's a really good sign. So if you have that intrinsic motivation, for me, a lot of that came, and I'm sure some of the kids would love to hear this, but for me, the initial inspiration was actually playing video games. And I really wanted to make video games because there's nothing more like anything that's really exciting and awesome. The only thing more exciting and awesome than that thing is actually making it yourself. So that was my experience. And for kids that feel that way, take whatever they're happy about. And there's so many things you can do with software. So I had a lot of those experiences.
That's great. We have a student hackathon, kind of like Hack for a Cause, coming up in exactly a month. And a lot of them choose to build a video game with a showcase there at the end. And so I would love to chat with you offline about potentially being a team mentor, because every team gets a professional mentor to help them throughout the weekend.
Very cool.
But to be continued. And Dalen, this will be the last time you go last, I promise.
No problem. No, real similar experiences there where it really just seemed like once you pick something that's kind of fun and start to dive into it, that's when you start to get motivated to keep learning about it. And for me, it was, I wanted to build race cars, right? And so I eventually figured out I didn't want to be a mechanic, and then eventually figured out I didn't want to build race cars. But it's once you find something you like and you don't know where you're going to end up. So.
Yeah. So I'll double back, and you can be the first to answer this question, because you almost did. But how did you know you wanted to pursue this career? And it sounded like it started with race cars. But the second part of that question is there anything that you wish you would have known before you really got on this track?
Yeah. No, I think really what. No, I honestly, it was just kind of a bunch of discovery, like trying out different clubs in different areas. I think I kind of wish I knew how to do homework. Honestly, I really struggled in the beginning of college because I figured out I didn't even know that I didn't know how to do homework. So I really struggled there. But
okay, so having kids learn how to do homework. I wish I had a magic wand, because I feel like that would solve a lot.
Have them start losing money from withdrawing classes, and that'll motivate them. So.
Right. Oh my gosh. That's what we're trying to avoid. Thanks, Dalen. Jared, what about you? How did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
So I had a similar as Yona, but my school actually put on a architectural class. So we had the drafting class, and then you could advance into an architecture where we actually got to design a house. And I found it was an outlet for me on my curiosity, as well as, all my creative output. And then on top of that, we had the trade school, where at the end of the year, everybody's house went into a pool, and there was a trade school nearby. We had 4 high schools that were all in on it. And whoever's house design got chosen is actually the house that the trade school built the next year.
Wow.
So for me, it was just one of those things, like seeing that creativity come to fruition was huge. I remember standing in line on opening day of one of the houses, and somebody wondering where something was in the home, and you were able to tell them, right, before ever going in the house. So that was a big thing for me. And then I'll piggyback on Dalen on homework, and then taking notes. Having somebody teach you to take proper notes and how to organize those is going to be huge. So that was the biggest thing I had to learn when I got to school, is because you take notes and then you can't follow where your own thought process is going. It hurts.
True. And I'm sure there's a lot of trial and error that could happen there too, while still in high school, before you're
definitely.
for classes.
I mean, you don't need to write down every single word,
Right.
right? And everybody relies on talking to a device and having it write it for you now. So it's one of those things, write down the key notes, and that's the biggest part of it.
Okay, great. And Yona, outside of your love for programming and outside of that student competition that you were in, is there anything that really solidified it for you, that a software engineer is what you would like to do?
You know, my answer might be somewhat boring here because it was just so incredibly apparent for me. I really enjoyed software engineering. Now, interestingly, my first love was actually, I wanted to get into electrical engineering, but that was a lot harder. And so the low barrier to entry that you can just start coding. Nowadays, the barrier to entry for electrical engineering is much, much lower. And I think if I did it all over again, that's what might happen. For me, I had a friend who worked at a software company, and they had an internship program, and they sort of took me, somewhat sight unseen, and that's what started things off. There are boot camps and such, but here there aren't as many like systems for getting into the actual career. Yeah. And I always wondered how that would happen. And so for me, it was knowing somebody who got me an internship, and I was one of only a couple interns that company ever did. So, this is perhaps a bigger comment than this particular context, but companies having internship programs is, I think, incredibly valuable. And once I got into once I was actually there in an office, which is kind of scary beforehand, you're like, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be difficult? That really helped. Like, that was like, oh, I can do this. This is not that hard. Like, it's reality. It's not as scary as it might seem from the outside.
Yeah, you keep opening the doors for me to pitch our programs, so thank you. But we do have it. We just piloted our internship program last summer. We paid 41 high schoolers to go work in local companies, and we paid their wages at $15 an hour. And they spent 3 weeks in local companies, and that's something that we're going to do again next year. And so having business partners like you all that are willing to open your doors to young people makes that program possible. And I think for so many people, career choices rely on who you know or who your parents know, or and we just don't want it to be that way. And I think a lot of people share that point of view. Cody, when did you know that you wanted to be a civil or structural engineer?
I probably in middle school, I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but it was actually in like my sophomore year of high school, I had a career class where you had to go explore something. So I really debated on whether to do mechanical or civil, and ended up choosing to do civil because I was from a small town, and I saw that as if I wanted to live in a small town, I could do that in that path. And that's really from then on, as I was focused on becoming a civil engineer down the rest of my path. So
that's great. Jeremy, anything to add to that, or is there anything that you wish you would have known?
So I put two things that I wish I would have known. The first one was very similar to Jared and Dalen, which was I was fairly cocky going into my freshman year, thinking that I would continue how I was doing in high school, and I got smoked. So that humbling part, or in hindsight, being prepared to say that this is going to be a step up, it's going to be different, and be ready for it, that would have been huge for me. And the second thing, at least from a chemical engineering side, is that process engineering is about solving problems and troubleshooting. And I wasn't, I guess I wasn't as aware of that part of the discipline. And it would have been nice to just maybe have a little bit more awareness of that, just so from a preparedness standpoint. But that's for me, from a chemical engineering side, that is one of the things that would have further driven me to be a chemical engineer if I'd have known the amount of troubleshooting and problem solving and support for others that this discipline provides.
Okay.
I forgot to mention that for me, I was okay on the homework and the note taking, but I found out dramatically fast when I got into college that I was a very poor test taker. It was so poor that well, just for example, I graduated with a 4.0 from high school, and I was in physics and calculus for a year. I was so poor at test taking when they made me take the entry-level test for math that they put me into like Math 95. And I had to argue my way out of it.
And you did. You
So,
successfully-
I did. I was like, I've been calculus for a year. I just can't take a test, all right? So anyway, so test
Oh my
taking
gosh.
skills and learning that in high school is very important.
Okay, great. So, oh yeah, go ahead, Yona.
I just wanted, because you shared that, I wanted to share the other side of it, which is I'm really good at taking tests and I'm terrible about everything else in school. And I'm seconding the homework comment. So knowing yourself in that way, just
Right.
abstractly, like finding out what your strengths are. And even just like I sometimes would talk when I took a little bit of community college, and I would just talk with my professors and say, look, I suck at homework, but I'm good at tests. Will you like just weight the tests a little higher?
And they said yes.
Some did, some didn't.
Okay, I love it. Being scrappy, it's the way to be. There's a question in the chat that I would love to address, and I'll open this up to any panelist who has an answer. But Christy, who is a career counselor at Willamette High School, asks, what was it that got you through those moments when it got so hard that you wanted to quit? And I've heard about a lot of exams, a lot of studying, a lot of this doesn't align with my skill set. So in those moments, what kept you trucking on?
I can say for me, it was my grandpa. I grew up with my grandparents, and I honestly, I went through the same thing. I got to college. The first thing I wanted to do was get out of state, right, away from everybody and everything I was used to. And that was a shock to the system as well, with the higher level of education and then being on your own for the first time. My grandpa basically had to talk me off the ledge because I was ready to go. And then I saw how many people after the first semester had actually left. And I didn't want to be one of those people. So it's all within you and where you want your drive to be. And I don't know if there's much you can do as way of coaching, but as guidance counselors and stuff like that, it's within you to see it within the children, because my high school is one of the pushing drivers to prove everybody wrong. Because I was the person who didn't like homework. I did really well on tests, and then they had to, look at me and say, well, are you cheating because blah, blah, blah. But no, I didn't do it that way because I had other things to focus on. And then once I got to college, it was to prove other people wrong. And that was my drive. So.
Thanks for sharing that, Jared.
Say that really just having a strong internal motivation and work ethic, I don't care who you are and how smart you are, it takes a lot of work to get through engineering school, and you got to buckle down and you just got to be motivated and not say quit.
I had an experience back to the scouting. I was one step away from Eagle Scout, and I wanted to quit, but my parents didn't let me. And then I became an Eagle Scout, and so I saw the benefit of pushing through. So I just didn't let myself get into that same spot as far as even considering quitting. But it was reference to that.
Yeah.
And so for folks that may not have a strong family background, I think back to the mentoring or partnering while they're in high school so they can have accountability buddy or something like that. I think that'll really help the kids that may not have that foundation in the home.
That's great. Thanks, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
Last thing I'll add on this one is also to let kids know, prepare them. The one thing I wasn't prepared for going into college, like Damon said, was all the 101 work. For engineers, that's getting your toe in every discipline, right? So I went in knowing I wanted to be a structural, kind of like Cody knew he wanted to be a civil, but they forced me to take electrics and circuits, and they forced me to take some mechanical classes, and that kind of stuff kind of threw me off because it wasn't exactly what I was anticipating. But knowing that your first year is all going to be basics, they want you to learn and want you to be sure of what discipline you choose to move forward, because it doesn't get any easier. So knowing to get the hard stuff out of the way, once you're over that hurdle, it's all in your interest playing. So
E-Fundies was my yeah.
It was that 101 class, man, where you had every 2 weeks was a different discipline, and I just couldn't focus like that.
I want I don't have obviously the exact experience that you guys did, not having gone to engineering school, but I will say that in terms of addressing the issue and, something that you think you want to do is really, really difficult and you don't think you can make it through, my best advice there is give people the opportunity to have smaller projects where they have that experience and then are successful one way or the other. Anything that you can do where like you have a project that is going to be a struggle and that the kids are going to have to innovate and they're probably not going to get done exactly what they hoped they would, but in the end, produce something good. That feeling of having, and that's happened to me several times throughout my career as well. And every time I feel like I'm just that much more prepared the next time things get really difficult to say, you know what, something's going to work out. I've done it before. I'll do it again.
Yeah, it's absolutely learned behavior. Thanks, everybody. Dalen, did you want to add something? Because you can.
Oh, yeah, similar to that. I think there was a point where I just I sort of chose to be better at it, but I don't think that it's not just like I was born with that. I think what really helps lead up to that is having those jobs and extracurriculars, like where you have a manual labor job, you have to get to the end of the day, you have to choose to get to the end of the day. You're kind of digging down into that same I'll call it work ethic, I guess, decision making, and that's where like having a carrot of some sort of club or activity that you actually enjoy, and like maybe you're not doing well at it, but if you really want to do it, you're going to choose to buckle down. It's kind of have to apply that same mentality to college if you're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. Great insight. Thank you all. So obviously all of these engineering disciplines require some post-secondary education. So that is clear. And so I'm curious what colleges or community colleges or post-secondary programs you might encourage local high school students to explore if they plan to pursue your specific engineering discipline. It does not have to be your alma mater, but if there's anything in the state of Oregon that sticks out or that your companies hire from often, yeah, please share. And let's start with Jared.
I think the easiest answer that everybody's going to go with is, your mathematics and your sciences. You can't proceed without those. We go into this thinking we're going to be mathematicians and then realize we don't want to go that far. So, but other than that, I think just any kind of construction. For my particular discipline, it's going to be construction oriented. So I started off actually framing houses, and you learn what works and what doesn't in a hands-on atmosphere. And I think any engineering discipline, you learn quick that hands-on is a lot different than reading it in a book. So
yeah,
that'd be my one.
Do you have any specific schools, like is the U of O, OSU, Linfield?
Not specifically. No, I came from University of Wyoming, so we don't really dive into specific things. I do like the forestry program at OSU. I think it's great, especially for where I'm at, but most of that scientific background for OSU. So.
Okay, thanks, Jared. What about you, Dalen?
I know that we've taken interns from the pre-engineering program at LCC, Lane Community College. Yeah, other than that, yeah, it's hard to do. Yeah, getting some of that core stuff out of the way at community colleges is a really good way to go. I know other engineers that have done that, and that also is a good way for people to a litmus test to decide if they really want to keep doing it.
Yeah. I didn't even realize that they had a pre-engineering program. That's great. It's great to know. Yona.
Well, since, I would say that software engineering, again, is probably the exception to the need for the post-secondary education, but I certainly, so I'll speak only from the experience I have, but I'm a big fan of community colleges for a number of reasons, but obviously they're cheaper. But the thing that I really liked when I went to LCC is the student body. Most of the people there are, motivated to learn, to get work done. There's less partying, there's less, it's a more diverse student body. which I really appreciated. I feel like as a software engineer, I really should address the question of boot camps here, because that's a big thing right now. And I wish I had a better answer. I know some people who've had success going to them, as you know, these sort of unofficial schools for programming that theoretically teach you and will get you a job in, you know, just a few short months. I guess what I would say to that is, you know, it takes a long time to learn a skill, and the boot camps might be helpful for some people, but I think the, you know, long-term self-study or internships generally work better. Or I actually want to say one more thing on the school subject, which is to just, for kids who are thinking about software, it's really important to differentiate between software engineering and computer science. I think those is very, very often those two ideas are conflated, and they're really different. So going to school for computer science will not necessarily prepare you to be a software engineer. Some schools have software engineering degrees, although it's actually relatively rare. But just be aware that those are really different tracks and are taught differently.
And I think in the high school setting, all that exists is computer science. As far as like the career technical education goes, it is labeled computer science, but you're talking when they move on to the next step, making that distinction.
Yeah, and I think that even in high schools, often they call things computer science that it really should probably be called software engineering, and vice versa. If you are focusing on, you know, actual writing code and building software, that's software engineering. If you're talking about designing algorithms and how you can use an AI to tell the difference between a strawberry and a grape, that's computer science.
Okay. I just learned something. Thank you, Yona. Jeremy, any programs or schools in this area that stick out to you?
Well, the first one is, especially with Oregon residents, you know, if taking advantage of the LCC, you know, without having to pay is a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And then of course I'm biased to Oregon State from an engineering standpoint, but from a higher level or bigger picture, I really think that they should look at what is of interest, or what schools will provide them the best opportunity, what they think they want to be, and visit a few of them, because it's not just the school, but it's the surroundings, it's the campus, and make sure that they will be able to live while they're being a student and enjoy that part of it. Because if you're miserable outside of just going to school, it's going to be even tougher to get to the finish line. And that's not to say that transferring is bad. I did it, and I don't feel bad about it, but it's nice to, you know, be able to say, I researched it, I found it, this is where I want to go, and this is where I ended up finishing. So
yeah, and a lot of schools offer field trips to different college campuses to give all kids an opportunity to walk around on campus and to get a feel for campus. So taking advantage of those opportunities feels like a wise move. Cody, you had no idea that telling me to switch up the order would mean that you'd go last every time.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. I think, just echoing a little bit of what I've heard, but I'm a big proponent of community colleges. I think all of the Oregon community colleges are solid for the pre-engineering. They all have pre-engineering programs that prep you to go into a bachelor's program at any of the engineering colleges. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think that counselors should describe to high school students, in that obviously the cost is much less than going to the university from the start, but the class sizes and the level of attention and support you're going to get at a community college is dramatically better than at the university, and there's less distraction. So I was really set on going straight to the four-year university. I failed to get any financial aid, even though I tried immensely as a 4.0 student, and went to a community college, and I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And then far as schools, I'm like all of the Oregon public engineering colleges that have engineering degrees. They don't all have the same degrees. So you have to kind of look at which ones offer the programs that you want. Into Yona's comments, I'm not nearly as in-depth familiar with software engineering as he is, but like OSU does have software engineering courses. I don't know if they have a degree, but I think they mix that into the computer science. But there is degree paths for people that want to go into that type of work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So just in general, OSU is more focused on like electrical and software engineering, whereas the University of Oregon is more focused on computer science and physics. And that.
Great. Thank you. Any career options in your fields that are available for students with technical or associate degrees only, and that is as much schooling as they would like to do? And it does not have to be an engineering title, but is there anyone within your work world that you work with often? And Cody, go for it.
So the other thing that community colleges have is they have drafting programs, and that's, we need more drafters badly in industry. We can't find enough designers and drafters to create the drawings that we need. And so the various colleges have a little bit different emphasis on which programs they focus on more. But Lane has a good program, LVCC, Chemeketa, they all have these programs, and I'd really like to see more kids going into that. It's a good career path. You can grow in that. It's not just a menial drafter. As you learn more, you can become more of a designer, and you're the one figuring it out, doing the layouts and figuring out what should be on the drawing. Another path is surveying. We have a huge recession in the amount of surveyors that we have across the country, and it's really bad in Oregon as well. We're down to about 600 licensed surveyors in the whole state, and just less than 10 years ago we had 2,000. So we've got a real need for surveyors. That can be done through a 2-year degree and then a lot of experience in the field, or you can get a 4-year degree at, say, either in civil engineering, or Oregon Tech offers a specific surveying geomatics degree, and then you can become a licensed surveyor, similar in the same way that you become a licensed engineer.
That's great to know. Thank you, Cody. We have a friend that's that is a CAD drafter at his engineering firm, and he keeps growing, and he makes an incredible salary. And he did 2 years at Lynn Benton CC, and that's it. And he launched right into a career. Anyone else?
He stole 2 of mine, but the other ones I had were also inspection services. There's a huge need right now, I think, in every form of engineering for disciplines to have inspectors on site. You can be weld inspector, building inspector, electrical inspector, whatever it is. You can get city jobs. So the city plans review for structural, whenever you're doing plan review, you can get through that outlet. And then if you're actually the hands-on type person, the inspections or just construction management on its own, going into work for a contractor and helping to be able to diagnose and read plans is one of the biggest parts that we see that people struggle with sometimes, or don't have enough people on hand to be able to do the takeoffs and the actual construction of the buildings based on the multidisciplines. If you can be multidisciplinary and read everything that you need for a project, that's actually pretty huge.
Okay. Jeremy, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I would say at least with chemical engineering, there's probably less opportunities without a degree, but I guarantee you from a manpower standpoint, if you had the pre-engineering degree and went to like a chemical company or somebody and said, hey, this is what I'd like to do, here's my skill set, and here's my, here's how I did, and I guarantee you that there would be a few folks that would bring you on and mentor you, teach you, possibly even, pay for your, continuing education to get to that level where they, from maybe a corporate standpoint, have to have it. But, the initiative and just showing the drive to that this is what you want to do would probably be open a few doors at least. Not maybe a lot, but a few. That's
an excellent point. Thank you, Jeremy. I think that happens much more frequently than we realize. Dalen.
Yeah, well, less related to engineering, just making sure to do a shout out for like the craft labor and how that is a higher education in itself to become a journeyman, welder, millwright, machinist, that kind of thing. And talented people in those positions are also needed. And you work very closely with engineers. It's just a different branch of getting the same job done.
That's great. We're tackling the trades and apprenticeships in February.
My daughter just graduated, in 2 of her graduating classes, they were going to the trades, and they're going to get paid and get trained at the same time. And I thought that's, those two probably are maybe the smarter of the group, from the standpoint of just jumping right in and knowing that they didn't want to go to college, but knew they wanted to do something that was very technical. So that's definitely a way to go.
Yeah. Yona, anything to add?
I mean, mine's the easy one, right? Because there's almost all software companies, even the really big companies, IBM, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, most of them have dropped any formal education requirements from their software engineering path careers. It's definitely helpful, but you can, if you have an associate's degree, honestly, it doesn't really have to be in engineering. An interesting little anecdote, but often people with degrees in English do well in software. There's been some interesting research into how that part of the brain is very similar to programming, but not well-known thing. But yeah, I mean, get the experience, build something is what I always tell people. If you can demonstrate your ability through something that you've created, a portfolio. In many ways, software engineering is actually a little bit more similar to one of the crafts or one of the trades, I would say. It's a little similar to welding or being a millwright or something, where it's like you're operating machines and producing an artifact. And so if you can demonstrate that you can do that, we care a bit less about your education.
That's great. Thanks, Yona. Alrighty, so this next question that we have here is from an educator that works out at Triangle Lake Charter School. And so I think this comes from her perspective, being from a much smaller school. And I think we all know that the smaller schools have fewer resources more often than not. And so she says, I have students interested in this career field, but our school is extremely limited in course offerings. What's a good way to introduce realistic industry experience into our classrooms? And I've heard, a lot of talk about projects and working on something that has a finite end result. But any other ideas that come to mind about how students could be practicing these skills in some of our smaller schools? And I'm going to just open it on up, so feel free to unmute yourself. Jeremy.
Yeah, so I'll go with something I believe, Yona, you said with regards to open source. And now 3D printers are, we just bought 2 more and we paid half for both of them that we did our first one. But it was like $1,000. So $1,000 is maybe a lot for that school, but get creative, figure a way to get enough to buy like a 3D printer, and then the kids can make stuff. And it goes back again to Yona's idea, where just make their portfolio. I made a 3D model of this, or I did this and I did that. And then, because that takes some learning on their own, as well as some learning, from whatever website you could go to. But that seems to be relatively reasonably costed for the amount of benefits that those kids could get.
Great idea. Thanks, Jeremy. Cody.
I think that anything that they can do with hands-on like that is great. And if you're in a small school and you don't have the wood shops and the mechanic shops, maybe they look for local companies that might be willing to host them to do small projects, or a host for a day to get their hands on some of the equipment or the code or whatever it might be, to get them exposure outside of a book, right? Get them out, help them build a house, or go to the automotive repair shop and work for a day and learn about auto shop or whatever it is. It's my idea.
I love it. Career exploration. That sounds great. Dalen?
When I was in the university, we was with different extra, Engineers Without Borders inside of Automotive Engineers, and we would do outreach. So, you could always reach out to those clubs, and sometimes they'll come out and we would do like a bridge building activity with a classroom. And, because sometimes those clubs, they have the materials or the funding for that kind of stuff.
It's a great idea. Yona?
I'm trying to think of anything that hasn't already been said.
Oh, you don't have to go. I just
the-
saw that you weren't muted.
No, I grew up, I went to Mackenzie School, Mackenzie Elementary up near Blue River. And so I had that experience being at a very small school, although it actually did have a wood shop. I was a bit young though. In small communities, they're often more tight knit, and I wonder if there would be opportunities to, have some. And this is actually something where the county and the government could get involved too. If there's a crew working on something or doing something that could involve children, so they can actually, especially high schoolers, get involved on a crew that's, I don't know, doing some road maintenance or something, like some opportunity for an internship that's local. If there's an improvement project in their neighborhood, maybe they're installing new electrical transformers or something, and just having the opportunity to go see that and participate in some, minimal way that's safe. But stuff happens in your community, right? Look at, like, especially like civil engineering and all of that stuff. Like, you live in a community, things are occurring. Can you get involved somehow?
Mm-hmm.
Also with the software side, I mean, your tiny town probably has a website or two, right? Who builds those websites, and can you talk to those people?
Or your school. I've seen a lot of outdated school websites that could probably use some student influence.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say real quick that's actually something I totally forgot about. But yeah, me and some friends built our school's website when I was probably 15 or so, and that was probably one of the very first projects that I actually completed. So that was a good exercise. It's a great opportunity.
Love it. Jared.
I just double down on the community outreach stuff. We had Habitat for Humanity, right? So I was in Scouts, I was in band, I was in sports. All these things had fundraisers that you had to do as well. And part of those fundraisers, we would, volunteer time. So it's the Habitat for Humanity, anything you can do to get hands-on. And it's going to be the first thing you realize you don't like it, right? If you don't like being out there swinging a hammer or stirring the concrete or sitting at the computer or any of these things, you're going to realize quick that you might have to change your mind on what you're looking at. So
yeah, and those are temporary experiences, so why not eliminate them now before we've chosen a college based upon what we assume we're going to like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a great point. So there's a question that just popped up into the Q&A that I think we will end on. And Lisa is chiming into the chat right now. Lisa's actually the educator that asked that question. So hi, Lisa. She thanks you all for your feedback. There's a question in the Q&A that just asks about how your specific fields were affected by COVID. I think we saw a lot of industries take very hard hits, and we recognize that there may be more pandemics down the road. So curious how either your company or your field, how it fared during COVID, and if there are any ways that you've pivoted in order to remain competitive during this time. And again, I think I'm just going to open it right up to those who have ideas.
Well, I'll say as an engineering consulting firm, it definitely hit us in that some of our clients suddenly had to shut their doors and not allow external people in. So that was hard to we had people that worked full-time on site that were kicked out, and we had to try and absorb them back into the office, or back into their home and keep them working from remotely. And then suddenly had to change our business model on where's our information at, and how do we go from working inside four walls and where you're connected directly to the server to everybody's at home, and how do you get to that data that is significant, especially when you're talking about 3D modeling. Mm-hmm. And so that was a quick transition that everybody had to do. And I think that, it definitely hit us. Our firm was able to, utilize the payroll protection, and we kept everybody employed, and we did a lot of non-billable work as along with jobs that we had kept going as well. But it's rebounded, and now the challenge is finding enough people to hire.
A big challenge. I've heard from a lot of different industries. Yeah. Thanks, Cody.
It was interesting. Obviously, we all started working from home because we could, and we were already relatively well equipped for that. I would say the overall effect on many of us was actually pretty small, but what I've noticed, and one of the interesting effects was that many of us continue to work from home even when we could go back to the office, and that has introduced some challenges, especially for new employees. So this, I don't know how relevant this will be, but if you're starting a job at a workplace that's 100% remote, it can be much harder, I think, to get sort of worked in and getting to know people.
Yeah.
So that's been a real challenge for us. We've had a number of new employees that haven't really, that we've struggled to get into the fold.
Thanks, Yona. Jared?
So COVID specifically, but this was kind of a double down for me. When I graduated in 2005, right? So I was right before the first housing bubble. So for a structural engineer, my main focus at that point was residential construction. So when that popped, nobody was building anymore, right? Because we had an excess. COVID was a little bit different because of the fact that we're still having housing shortages. We still have some of that going on in the market. And now I work for a manufacturer. So what I found, even the first time I worked for a firm, and not only did I find my discipline as structural, but I had to find a niche, right? So I worked for a firm that had 3 different principles, and each one had their cell phone towers was one, foundation remediation and exploration was another, and then doing glazing design was another. So we found ways of moving outside of maybe your comfort zone, but having a niche that you worked on the side, or finding something that allowed you to move forward and progress was big. So I've been focused on code and IBC, which is the International Building Code Development, and different things like that for now the big thing is mass timber. I'm sure Cody hears that a lot too. So finding these different outlets, even though you have a discipline that you want to study, there's always that, for lack of better term, side hustle that you can focus on or help to build your knowledge and your use. So.
Thank you. Jeremy?
So I have 2, I guess, examples or kind of morphs of one. I have a good friend that's a PhD chemical engineer who works at a paper mill and is responsible for multiple paper mills. And typically when you do upgrades or do any type of, you're in the facility, well, because of COVID, they got comfortable. They put in the safeguards so that anyone could be anywhere basically and do the things that normally they, upper management would say, you got to be on site to watch it happen. Mm-hmm. So I think the evolution of technology, or at least embracing what was already there, really was key and helped or got accelerated during COVID. So that's from the chemical engineering side. Where I'm at now, PacTech and my group, we make equipment. So I had a small group of manufacturers that we had to manufacture in here. So it wasn't going to be remote, but I was able to keep the engineers that are doing the 3D modeling and the design, they could be remote. So the challenge, kind of going back to what Yona said, was how do we stay cohesive when we have some people here and some people not? And, again, we embrace technology with Zoom and GoToMeeting like we never did before. We got everybody cameras so that they had, I required people to be on video, because it's great to have a conference call. Well, let's use the phone. But when we have a video call, let's be on the phone, or let's be video. It's because that's about as close as we can get for the circumstances. So again, the morphing and just being adaptable when times come. So, because like you said, there's going to be another something, and we just need to be prepared to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. And we know that the pandemic decimated some industries. And so it's, not to say that engineering is pandemic proof, but it sounds like you probably fared better than some other industries did. Dalen, any last things to add, or shall we wrap it up?
No, I don't.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you to all 5 of our panelists. Really, really appreciate you giving us an hour of your time and, looking at those questions ahead of time. And to all of our participants, thank you for tuning in. We have our next panel, which we're going to open up registration for here very shortly. December 8th, we're going to be talking about finance and accounting with some local professionals. So please keep your eyes out for that email blast. Thank you again, everyone. Please have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.